Hello everyone, this is Eva Norlick-Smith with Yoga You Online, and I'm very pleased to be here today with Lynn Jensen. Lynn is the founder of the Seattle-based Yoga for Fertility program, and she has helped more than 2,000 women and couples to overcome fertility challenges. She is the co-author of the book Yoga and Fertility, A Journey to Health and Healing. And she has also produced a DVD on yoga for fertility with simple practices for fertility support. Lynn has developed and taught the yoga curriculum for a study founded by the National Institute of Health, which researched the effects of yoga on hot flashes. And in addition to teaching on yoga for fertility, she also teaches yoga for healthy hormones, both in classes and workshops, as well as retreats and teacher trainings. And Lynn, you also teach yoga for women classes at Microsoft.
That's right.
That's a busy schedule. So first of all, tell us about yourself. How did you get interested in yoga, and how did you end up specializing in yoga for women's health and teaching yoga for women at Microsoft?
So it's kind of a long story because I've been practicing yoga for over 30 years. I started doing yoga when I was living in Japan.
Ooh.
Yes.
Was that like yoga for homesickness?
It was really yoga because I couldn't go out, and I used to be a runner, and I couldn't go out and run there because the winters were too harsh. So I started to do yoga as a home practice, something to do that I could do in the house. And then I really got interested in yoga for fertility through my own fertility challenges. I had at that time been doing yoga for already a number of years, and I had already been teaching for a few years yoga. And when I went through my own fertility challenges, I realized that it would be helpful to have a kind of yoga that really was specifically supportive for women who were going through fertility challenges. In hindsight, I feel like the practice I was doing was probably too strenuous, but at that time, nobody was offering anything to do with yoga for fertility. So that's how I got interested in yoga for fertility, and from there, then my students started to graduate and said, can you teach prenatal yoga? Can you teach postnatal yoga? So I started to add those classes in. And then I started to teach yoga for midlife women classes because a lot of what I was doing with yoga for fertility was working with the endocrine system. Working with hormonal balancing because it's so crucial, women who are dealing with fertility issues. So that segued into teaching yoga for midlife women, and that's how I was invited to put together this program, design the yoga sequence, and teach the classes for the Yoga for Hot Flashes study for the National Institute of Health.
Oh, interesting. Wow. So a lot to talk about. So just backtracking to the fertility work that you've been doing, what's some of the experiences or the feedback you've gotten from the experiences people have had?
Well, I have a lot of testimonials, hundreds of testimonials, and I get a lot of baby announcements. But I thought maybe an interesting way to answer that question would be just to read you an email that I got just this past week from a former student. And I call them graduates when they get out of my class and go on to prenatal yoga classes. She says, I wanted to reach out and thank you for your help, and also to share the news that I'm now pregnant. As you are aware, I transferred an embryo a few weeks ago, and it worked this time. So she was doing a high-tech fertility treatment. I'm sure yoga and acupuncture helps me a lot this round. Please feel free to share the news and pass my regards to the class. Tell them not to give up, chase your dream, and don't forget to do yoga every day. It really helps. And this is from a woman who was 40 at this time. So I do have, most of the women in my classes are between age 35 and 45, usually.
Oh,
sometimes earlier 30s. But
yeah, the time when
who are struggling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's the time when it starts getting much harder to conceive.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting.
So I've had lots of testimonials like that. How women have really felt that yoga's been so beneficial for them uh,
Yeah, yeah,
this time.
that's very
Hmm.
interesting. And you mentioned that doing the work with fertility made you segue into sort of broader yoga programs targeting the endocrine system, and you do teach this program on yoga for hormonal health. And
Hmm.
I found it interesting when I was preparing for the interview that um, you know, I think this is something most women don't realize, that there's just such a wide range of symptoms that can be related to hormonal imbalance. So you note on your website that anything from mood swings, PMS, insomnia, weight gain, anxiety, depression, or poor immune function all can be related to hormonal imbalance. Is that really true?
It's a very long list. Yeah, really, absolutely. Hormones are super powerful actors in the body. And so when any of the hormones are out of balance, they can impact a very big range of systems and processes in the body. So as the symptoms can be any of those things that you just mentioned from hormonal imbalance. When I first started working with teaching yoga for fertility, I thought, I would go through the endocrine system and I would pick one or two of the glands in the endocrine system that would impact fertility, and we would focus on those, and then we could just kind of throw the rest of them out. And what I found when I was doing the research was that actually you can't do that, that every single gland in the endocrine system, if it's out of balance, can impact fertility and also lead to these other issues, such as insomnia and weight gain and all kinds of things. Mm.
Interesting. So is this something, I mean, I think most women know that PMS can be linked to some sort of hormonal imbalance. But then we get, through all of that stuff and we get to perimenopause, and
Hmm.
then there's another set of hormonal imbalances. So is this something that women pretty much are struggling with all their lives?
It can be. Yes, it can be. I really think that yoga is super helpful, though, with these hormonal imbalances. Because yoga is really just designed to work on these. In fact, yoga, every time you're doing a yoga pose, you are working on at least one of the glands in the endocrine system, and usually more than one, usually a couple of them. And yoga is just designed to do that. It's partly because yoga is designed to work on the chakra system. And when you look at the chakra system next to the endocrine system, they are really very exactly lined up.
Hmm.
So when you're working on the chakras, you can think about, okay, I'm working on second chakra, or you can think about, I'm working on the ovaries, which is one of the glands in the endocrine system. So yoga is really very much designed to help with the endocrine system and keep the hormones in balance.
Very interesting. And just, I mean, when I think of working with the chakras, I think of all the Ooga Booga stuff. You do the Biju mantras and you focus on
Sure,
the chakra and you do all that kind of stuff.
sure.
Um, but that's not really the way most people practice yoga. So, what do you feel like if you say that yoga, meaning I presume asana, which is what most people understand by yoga right these days? Um, so how do asana work on the endocrine system? What's sort of the basic principle of that?
It's really what the asana is doing, what the posture is doing. So, for example, if you're doing a twist, the twist is I kind of describe it as wringing out those organs and the glands that are being affected by the twist. So
Mm,
you're wringing them out, and then when you come out of the twist, you get a whole fresh blood supply into that organ or gland,
right.
right? And then that's really bringing new energy, blood flow, all the nutrients into that area. So a
Right.
lot of times, organs and glands uh, get stagnant. Energy
Mhm.
gets stagnant there. And there's not blood flow through, especially a lot of us who have really sedentary lifestyles, sitting at a desk all day. Um, so it's really like we are really revitalizing those glands and organs. with the asanas. Of course, things like bija mantras help too. So those kinds of things are also helpful. But
Yeah.
as you say, a more standard asana practice is really focused on, you know, rejuvenating, I would say, the organs and glands.
Right, right. So how is your approach to teaching? How would you feel that, how would you describe it as different from, other teachers teaching asana?
Well, I guess it's because I'm focusing, for instance, on yoga for fertility, or if I'm focusing on yoga for midlife women, I am choosing the poses that we're doing based on what we're trying to achieve for
Yeah.
those particular populations of people.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if I'm teaching yoga for fertility, we might do a lot of focus on the ovaries as one of the places, so pelvic opening kinds of things, also
Yeah.
heart opening kinds of things,
Right.
balancing the thyroid gland in the throat because that just if it's out a tiny bit can impact fertility. So it's really about
Interesting.
which poses I'm choosing to include in the class,
Right.
and sometimes the poses that I'm not including in the class. So uh, there's a
Interesting.
whole issue of doing poses that are more yin enhancing and or more yang enhancing, and
Yeah.
um, a lot of the yoga practices, the asana practices out there today are much more yang enhancing. They're doing a lot of poses that bring up the yang energy, and um, a lot of
Interesting.
what I'm doing is focusing more on the yin energy.
Yeah. Is that the same principle if you're treating a practice to balance hormones? Is that also about sort of bringing in more of the feminine yin aspect of the practice?
Can be. Yeah, right. In fact, when I was teaching the classes for the National Institute of Health yoga effect on hot flashes, I had one woman come to class and say, well, my yoga teacher gave me the sequence to do to help with my hot flashes, but it seems to me like it's making it worse. And I said, well, why don't you show me what you're doing? And she showed me the sequence, and it was all heat producing poses, lots of downward dog and things. Anytime you take weight on your hands, you're producing heat in the body. So
Right.
so you can do the wrong practice, right? If
Interesting.
you can create the wrong things if you're not paying attention to the effects of the poses.
Interesting. Yeah, you were kind of implying earlier that you felt that the reason you might have had a difficulty initially to conceive was that you were doing a practice that was too strenuous or counterproductive.
Well, it wasn't really the yoga practice that was the problem. It was, and I think this is generally true. I mean, it was my whole lifestyle. At that time, I was working in the software industry, and I was managing international sales and marketing. So I was
Oh.
traveling outside the country 60% of the time. So really, what would have helped me a lot more would to be a more grounding practice and a
Right.
more yin practice.
Yeah.
I did not need that yang practice. So it does have to do with what else is in your life,
Right.
right?
Right.
If
Yeah.
everything else in your life is very yin, then having a more yang practice could be exactly what you need.
Right.
But
Right. Yeah.
but for most of the people, and most especially the women who I see in my classes, they tend to be more in the type A category, uh, right? So what
Right.
they need
Right.
is probably not that strenuous yang practice right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And is that when you teach the women's health, do you focus mainly on the hormonal balance aspect?
Usually, yes,
Yeah.
because that's what people are needing.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, my classes are targeted towards specific things, like the yoga for fertility or midlife women or
Yeah.
healthy hormones. But like when I teach at Microsoft, that's a more general class, although we definitely bring in some things that, like these are stressful jobs generally that these women are in. So we're
Right.
bringing in things that it's going to help with that,
Right.
uh,
Right.
de-stressing and grounding and calming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. mm.
Tell us about this study that you were involved with. You made reference to it earlier, the yoga for hot flashes. How did that come about, and how did that all go?
Well, actually, it was a professor at the University of Washington here in Seattle decided to do this study. And she was also a yoga teacher, and she knew of what I was teaching. She was aware of my classes and yoga for midlife women. So she wanted to do a study and was able to get funding for it through the National Institute of Health. And so she recruited all the women, and she did a pre subjective interview with them about how hot flashes were impacting their lives. But then she also wired them up with sensors, so she could, for a 24-hour period, she could measure actually how many hot flashes they were having and the intensity of the hot flashes. So you had the subjective measure and the objective measure of those things. So she did that at the beginning, and then they went through my yoga program for 10 weeks. And of course, they were coming once a week. They were supposed to be doing their practice at home, of course. Some of them were doing it more than others. And then at the end of that time, she went back and did the same subjective and objective measurements of the hot flashes. And what was interesting was that this was a small study. This was a pilot study, so it wasn't a big sample. But what was interesting was that the objective piece hadn't changed that much after those 10 weeks, but the subjective piece had changed a lot. So in fact, the way that these women felt about the hot flashes and how much they were affecting them and how stressful they were for them had changed a lot. So really that's the important thing. It's, you know, are these annoying? Are they frustrating? Are they, you know, really bothering you in normal daily life?
So you could speculate they maybe got more in touch with their body, and for that reason were able to sort of embrace the sensation more easily.
Yes, and also a lot of those women discovered what the triggers were for the hot flashes during those 10 weeks, because they had started to pay attention to what they were doing and when they were having them. And so they were able to detect triggers, and, you know, some of them were dietary triggers, like some, you know, caffeine is generally a trigger for hot flashes. So some of them discovered that they could have their morning latte, but then they were going to have hot flashes. So it was a trade-off. They had to do that. There was one woman who was in the study who they were supposed to be doing this routine at home, and she came about the 5th week, and she said, "Well, I have to tell you, I have not been doing this at home. I decided this week I was going to do the legs up the wall pose, Viparita Karani, because that was one that I was highly recommending that they do at home." And she said, so I did that every day. And she said, at the last day, I started my period again. She said, I haven't had a period for a year. Do you think this is related to the yoga? I said, I think so. And she said, well, I'm not too happy about it. I was kind of happy with not having the period. Well, hot flashes, or are you which do you want? So it's very powerful stuff, actually.
No kidding. So if women you know, if someone had the suspicion that they, you know, might have a hormonal imbalance, what would be some of the indicators that they would look for to kind of clue them in that there could be something going on?
Well, I think that long list that you mentioned earlier, those are all clues. You know, am I having trouble sleeping? How do I have mood swings? You know, do I have a lot of time where I'm anxious or feeling low, negative? So there's a lot that's mood related. And just depending on where they are in the life cycle span, you know, PMS is another indicator if that there's some hormonal imbalance. A lot of my students also work with acupuncturists and Chinese doctors, and really the philosophy in the Chinese medicine area is that anything like that is a symptom, and it's telling you that something's out of balance, right? If you're not sleeping well, something's out of balance, you know. And there are glands in the endocrine system that are specifically impacting your sleep cycles, the pineal gland in the back of the head. So there are ways to help those get back into balance.
Right. A lot of those symptoms can also be related to stress. Is there a kind of a
Yes.
connection there?
Absolutely, absolutely, very big connection. So when I teach the Yoga for Healthy Hormones class, and you'll see this when I do the online piece, I kind of draw a triangle with the adrenal glands at the top of it because the adrenal glands are the ones that are pumping out stress hormones. And if they are pumping out stress hormones 24/7, then really all the other little poor glands below them on the triangle are not getting what they need. Most of the glands are using the same building blocks to produce the
Ah,
hormones. So if the adrenal glands are taking all of the building blocks for these other hormones, then you're getting deficits in all these other areas. So
interesting.
yes, that's why stress is very much related to all of these things. So super important to calm the adrenal glands down, to really start there with that stress reduction. And of course, yoga
Mm.
is really great for that. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you made reference to your course. So you tell us more about you. You have a course in Yoga for Healthy Hormones on Yoga U Online. So tell us more about that and what you're covering.
Yes, so I'm very excited to be doing this. It's going to be similar to what I do in my Yoga for Healthy Hormones workshops. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what does yoga have to do with your hormones, and how do we recognize when our hormones are out of balance. So some of the questions you've just been asking about, what kinds of things would we be seeing there? Um, and then how can yoga help with these things?
Right.
So in what ways are we going to approach it using yoga? So I think, someone who's interested in this and taking this workshop, maybe being able to recognize what are the symptoms of hormonal imbalance, like you said, what are some of the things that would show up, and then what causes hormonal imbalances.
Right,
We already
right.
alluded to stress as being one of the big things that contributes to that. And then I'll be talking about the endocrine system itself, because I
Right,
think most people don't really understand what that is,
right.
what it is, what's included in that,
Yeah,
what is it doing, what are those key pieces for the endocrine system.
yeah.
Uh, and then that's also very tied in, as you alluded to, with the stress. It's very tied into the parasympathetic nervous system.
Right.
So that's another piece of it. We'll talk a little bit about that and how does yoga help with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then how to choose yoga poses. So as I mentioned earlier, in my classes, I'm choosing the poses based on the effect of those poses,
Mm.
and the effect on sometimes a particular gland in the endocrine system, or a few glands in the endocrine system. So we'll talk about that, how to choose the poses to work with specific symptoms and specific hormonal imbalances.
Right.
And then really leave people with a daily practice that they can do that's specifically oriented to work on hormonal imbalance,
That's
in kind
great.
of a general way.
Yeah. So it sounds like some great self-care tools for an issue that I would, without exaggerating, say affects probably the vast majority of women.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. When you work with the hormonal imbalance program, teaching your own students, what are some of the feedback you've gotten from people from that work?
Um, well, people come with a variety of issues to that program. So, and it's also a variety of ages that attend that program. So they can be working on very different things. I can have some people in a class working on, dealing with PMS, severe PMS issues. I can have other women in that same class who are working on perimenopausal issues.
Right.
So pretty broad variety. So I think that the feedback is just generally that it helps. It
Right.
helps whatever issue they're working with. So
Right.
if it's PMS, they might come back and say, I'm not having the big mood swings that I was having, my headaches have gotten better or whatever, cramps
Yeah.
have improved. And with the perimenopause, whatever symptoms they're having, maybe they're starting to have some hot flashes or um, uh, mood swings kind of things. So uh,
Insomnia.
I'll read you one more little testimonial that I got from a student in a healthy hormones class, just because um, it's interesting because the yoga does do so many different things. So I'll just read you a quote from someone who was in one of the healthy hormones classes. This was a student who had formerly been in a yoga for fertility class with me. And just as an example of something that came out of her attending the yoga for healthy hormones and doing those classes. I wanted to let you know that yesterday, nearly 14 months from the day I gave birth, I finally started my period again. Coincidence? Maybe. But I totally credit your class and the yoga. Powerful stuff. Thank you. So
Oh, that's sweet. That is.
she was trying to get her cycles going again because they
Oh,
wanted to start trying for another child, and her cycles hadn't come back after giving birth. Uh,
interesting. Interesting.
so pretty broad range
Yeah,
of issues
yeah,
that
yeah.
I come with.
Is that a common issue? Is that something that happens fairly often? That what people's cycles don't come back for a while after giving birth?
It can be. That's quite a
Yeah,
long time, but it can be.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
So
that's a beautiful testimonial. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lynn. Sounds like just some really exciting work that you're doing. We're really happy to be sharing it on Yoga U.
thank you, Eva. Really enjoyed the interview, and I'm looking forward to doing the class.
Okay, great. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye
And
bye.
bye bye.